Tim Walz continues to be criticized for embellishing his rank in service. After it came out over the weekend, he once claimed to be an official bikini inspector. Walz's direct superior in the National Guard says Walz knew his unit was about to deploy to Iraq and went behind the back of his superior officer to resign. When reached for comment, Walz yelled, "Hey, look over there!" and then ran.
Greg Gutfeld just shredded Tim Walz into political confetti with a roast so sharp it could slice through Minnesota's bloated bureaucracy. From botched leadership and virtue-signaling stunts to turning the state into a punchline for failed policies, Gutfeld doesn't hold back. If you thought Walz was just another bland blue state governor, think again. This takedown exposes every misstep, mixed message. In Manufactured Mess, get ready for a brutal breakdown of leadership gone sideways, with Gutfeld pulling zero punches.
Gets back in the ring. I speak of former VP nominee Tim Walz. He joined Beto O'Rourke at a Texas town hall last night, and the estrogen levels were enough to give Chuck Norris menstrual cramps. I wonder, is our strength our diversity?
Our strength is our diversity.
Tim Walz runs Minnesota like a substitute teacher who just figured out the students know more about the syllabus than he does. But instead of stepping back, he doubles down with whiteboard bravado and zero results. Greg Gutfeld doesn't need a chalkboard to break it all down. He's got enough sarcasm and receipts to turn. Walz's policy blunders into a stand-up set for anyone who's ever looked at Minnesota and wondered, when did this become California with extra mosquitoes?
With Walz, it's hard to even bring him up. He has a resting snitch face. You know? I mean, he forfeited his man card during COVID and the riots. And you're right. And also, at that diner, of course, he left early. So don't you find it weird?
Let's start with leadership poor. Whatever Tim Walz has been doing in its place. The man governs like he's allergic to making decisions, preferring to outsource authority to task forces, committees, or some guy in a Patagonia vest named Kyle. Greg points out that Walz is the kind of leader who reads the instructions after the IKEA. Table collapses, then blames the carpet for not being level.
Now, Walz is weird, but he disguises it under the costume of phony compassion, a fake politician who masks destructive ideas under the guise of empathy. At a 2017 town hall, he implied 10-year-old boys should be able to invade girls' bathrooms because it's all about safety. Quote, "As a teacher, my number one responsibility in the classroom is the safety, security, and belongingness of every single child."
During the riots of 2020, while parts of Minneapolis literally burned, Tim Walz brought all the urgency of a guy late to a Zoom call because he couldn't find his webcam. Greg paints the scene perfectly. Chaos in the streets, businesses smashed. Two pieces and Walz reacting like he'd just spilled his latte. He didn't just hesitate, he froze like a deer caught in progressive headlights. His idea of decisive action, wait to see what CNN thought, then deliver a carefully scripted shrug.
This is a guy who says that he stands for public safety, but actively encouraged the rioters who burned down Minneapolis.
And that is a claim the Republican ticket is trying to hammer home about Governor Tim Walz. He is to blame for Minneapolis burning in 2020.
Is any of that true? David Schuman has new reporting tonight about what exactly Governor Walz did during those fateful few days.
Unfortunately, Memorial Day evening in Minneapolis was anything but peaceful, and neither was last night. Minneapolis and St. Paul are on fire. The fires still smolder in our streets.
Gutfeld dives into that riot response or total lack of wind with enough satire to fill a pothole the size of Hennepin County. While small business owners were boarding up windows and praying their livelihoods would survive, Walz was too busy, polishing his statement of empathy. Greg jokes that the only curfew Walz enforced was on common sense. Looting, riots, destruction. That wasn't an emergency, that was a community expression. The National Guard showed up so late they probably had to Uber in.
Our strength is our diversity. We've been talking about this for years as a country of immigrants, and we let them define the issue on immigration. We let them define the issue on DEI, and we let them define what woke is. We got ourselves in this mess because we weren't bold enough to stand up and say, "You damn right we're proud of these policies. We're going to put them in, and we're going to execute them.
So, wait, you lost because you weren't woke enough?
And let's talk about crime. Under Tim Walz, crime stats have been climbing like they're trying to escape his leadership altogether. But don't worry, he's got solutions. Redefining terms, gaslighting citizens, and pretending it's all just a perception problem. Greg cuts through that fog with ease. You don't need a PhD to figure out crime's up when you practically need a bodyguard just to buy cereal. Carjackings have become an unofficial Olympic sport in Minneapolis. And Walz responds like he's narrating a nature documentary, calm, detached, and utterly unhelpful. On policing, Greg doesn't hold back. Walz played the double game like a pro, nodding to activists with "defund the police" slogans, while quietly hoping someone else would handle the inevitable chaos. It's a balancing act that would make a gymnast dizzy, throw cops under the bus, and act baffled when they stop showing up to work. Meanwhile, Minnesota became a patchwork of restrictions, mandates, and executive orders that changed more often than a teenager's mood. Greg points out Walz issued so many contradictory rules that people practically needed a decoder ring just to buy groceries, liquor stores open, gyms closed. You could get a tattoo, but sitting in church, off limits. Walz's style of governance was like playing darts in the dark, blindfolded, while someone spun the dartboard.
We're here today because an unspeakable tragedy has unfolded in Minnesota. My good friend and colleague, Speaker Melissa and her husband Mark, were shot and killed early this morning in what appears to be a politically motivated assassination. Our state lost a great leader, and I lost a dearest of friends. My prayers also go out to State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette, who were each shot multiple times. The Hoffmans are out of surgery at this time and receiving care, and we are cautiously optimistic they will survive this assassination attempt. This was an act of targeted political violence. Peaceful discourse is the foundation of our democracy. We don't settle our differences with violence or at gunpoint.
And those lockdowns brutal? Small businesses were treated like public enemies, while big box chains got the green light to rake in mountains of cash. Greg says under Walz, essential meant giant corporations, and non-essential meant you mom and pop shops were strangled by regulations, while Target and Amazon made enough to buy a continent. The hypocrisy was so thick you could ice skate on Itand in Minnesota. Someone probably did. Now, let's talk education. If there's anything Tim Walz loves more than a task force, it's pretending to fix schools by throwing money at administrators while ignoring actual student results. Under his watch, test scores dropped harder than his approval ratings. Then there's the curriculum. Circus Walz's Minnesota turned classrooms into ideological obstacle courses, where basic math quietly takes a backseat to gender unicorns and pronoun charts.
Hack at Politico writes this piece on the body language from the debate, claiming that it speaks volumes. Yeah, it says that Walz lost, but one of them at Politico says is like Walz's wide eyes showed his passion and emotional intensity. Can we show that? There is his wide eyes. That humans would widen their eyes to convey that danger is close. What emotion are you getting from that?
Greg doesn't mince words. He says kids in Minnesota are graduating with the critical thinking skills of a piece of toast. The education system isn't prepping them for the real world. It's setting them up for a lifetime of group therapy and overpriced activism. And let's not forget taxes. Under Walz, Minnesota turned into one of the most heavily taxed states in the nation, because nothing says thriving economy like draining every penny from working families. Greg jokes that Walz sees tax hikes the way Oprah sees giveaways. Walz manages state finances like a kid with his first credit card loading up the cart with utopian dreams. Multi-million-dollar diversity projects, climate schemes that read like rejected sci-fi plots, and endless funding for departments whose main job is filing paperwork about other departments. The man might balance a budget if you handed him a calculator, a time machine, and maybe a lobotomy.
But whose expertise does he rely upon for his Midwestern takes? Here's Minnesota State Rep. Leigh Finke, who wants to train more children's doctors on sex change surgery and puberty blockers. He sponsored the Trans Refuge Bill, which Walz signed, which makes Minnesota a sanctuary state for such butchery.
Now, the climate agenda, Tim Walz pitches himself as Captain Planet's middle-aged cousin, saving the Earth one tax hike at a time. Greg rolls his eyes harder than a toddler denied a cookie. Under Walz, Minnesota's green energy push looked less like genuine progress and more like a bureaucratic piñata swing wildly in hope something breaks. Billions spent, minimal results, and a power grid one snowstorm away from total collapse. But hey, he's got windmill emojis in his bio, so it's all good. Transportation under Walz is just as laughable. The state dumped millions into light. Rail projects that never arrive on time cost more than the moon landing and serve fewer people than a lemonade stand in January. Greg points out that under Walz, public transit became code for money bonfire with extra steps. Instead of fixing root causes, Walz's team hands out pamphlets, hires consultants, holds community meetings where everyone cries and nothing changes. The only thing expanding faster than the homeless population is the stack of press releases claiming victory.
Also seem to doubt the validity of the last election and future ones.
They've released analyses of election data out of Clark County, Nevada that show some pretty convincing evidence of election tampering. So what can we do to make sure, A, that the midterms actually happen, and B, that they're free of fraud?
Yeah, this one's the core. We saw just recently Donald Trump's executive order to make it more difficult, specifically to women, trying to make it more difficult for women to be able to vote. We see one of the first things they do is try and restrict the vote.
Wait, so Trump is making it more difficult for women to vote? How so?
Let's not ignore Walz's obsession with buzzwords: equity, sustainability, resiliency, community healing. Greg jokes. Listening to Walz speak is like watching someone throw alphabet soup at a whiteboard. And reading it like prophecy, for all the talk, where are the results? You can't fix potholes with hashtags, and you can't run a state on feelings. Even his press conferences are a spectacle. Walz delivers updates like a high school. Principal trying desperately to be cool, lots of hand gestures, vague metaphors, and a smile that says, "Not sure what I just said, but it sounded important." He tried to surf the wave of social justice, then tripped right over the lifeguard stand. He rolled out policies so contradictory they could only exist in a multiverse of confusion. Greg says Walz is the kind of leader who wants to please everyone and ends up fixing nothing. He kneels for the cameras, but stands for chaos. Meanwhile, businesses flee the state faster than voters flee accountability. Walz governs like a man allergic to economic growth, every opportunity viewed as a threat, every success punished with another layer of regulation and red tape.
He exploited his military background to cover up his crime. He said it was related to his service and that he actually wasn't drunk. He just misheard the instructions in the drunk test. He blew a super high level. It was like, 0.2, driving 100 miles an hour. And then when he's running for office, he said that he wasn't drunk. I mean, this guy has creep written all over it. He created a snitch line, but lies about his personal infractions. He doesn't even own up to it. This is a guy who pushes a hoax about a sex on a couch, and then the closer you look at him, he's a creepy.
Greg imagines CEOs getting welcome baskets from South Dakota that simply say, "We don't hate you here." And what about agriculture? Minnesota farmers under Walz deal with more red tape than a Soviet bakery. Greg points out that while farmers begged for clarity, Walz offered new pathways for community engagement. Translation: absolutely nothing. The man could watch crops die and blame it on carbon privilege. Then there's his digital policy strategy, basically glorified Zoom. Filters. Minnesota's tech infrastructure still lags behind, but Walz brags about broadband equality like he invented Wi-Fi. Greg compares it to praising a flat tire for being equally useless on all sides. And when it comes to rural communities, Walz treats them like a second cousin who only gets a Christmas card if they vote correctly. The real kicker? Walz still parades Minnesota as a beacon of progressive success, despite stats that would make a banana republic blush. Greg says the only thing really shining in Minnesota is the polished nonsense they keep exporting to DC and late-night comedy monologues. Walz governs with the confidence of someone who's never had to live under his own rules, and that's the real tragedy. And Greg's just getting warmed up. Just when you think Tim Walz has run out of ways to turn a functioning state into a bureaucratic funhouse, he unveils another genius move, spending millions on task forces to study problems he helped create. It's like hiring a detective to solve a crime you committed, then demanding a taxpayer-funded mural about your bravery. Meanwhile, the streets of Minneapolis look like an open audition for a Mad Max reboot. And the only consistent public service is the graffiti.
Since his only attack was that the other guy was weird. Because everyone is weird, the more you get to know them. It's why marriage is a commitment. Over time, both spouses realize we're all bat crazy. But there's weird and there's dangerously insane.
Greg doesn't even have to exaggerate. Walz practically writes his own roast. His pandemic leadership was a masterclass in selective science, where data only mattered if it fit whatever press release he'd rehearsed that morning. And let's not forget the education fiasco, where test scores nosedived faster than his approval ratings, yet somehow the big priority became expanding equity lounges instead of teaching kids how to read. Greg's favorite part: watching Walz explain economic growth while businesses boarded up faster than if a hurricane were rolling in. It's not even satire anymore. It's Minnesota's official business plan: tax, spend, deny, repeat. And when residents pack up and flee to states that actually function, Walz calls it progress. Because nothing screams leadership like exporting your population with pride. It's the kind of delusion only politicians can afford, and Greg's just getting started. It's because when a guy runs a state like a community theater version of Idiocracy, you don't whisper your criticisms. You torch it with a flamethrower of facts and sarcasm. And believe this, the curtain hasn't dropped yet.